What is up YouTube, and welcome to this Mank breakdown and spoiler review. Mank is the latest flick from David Fincher and follows the titular character as he writes the iconic Citizen Kane script that itself was beyond controversial before filming and afterwards. Mank luckily does not rely on nostalgia or a fandom of the movie, as it is still a gripping and engaging movie for those of you who haven't seen Citizen Kane. Some biopics can lean heavily on their source material and nostalgia. Think Bohemian Rhapsody. My favourite character was the Kane itself.
Wait a minute, there was no Kane in Citizen Kane.
It opens with text explaining how Orson Welles has been given a contract to basically make what he wants and is widely considered the most generous contract of all time given to him by RKO in an era when directors, writers and actors were all hired on multi-picture deals and the contracts were very, very shackle-like. This was after an extensive theatre and radio career and is now infamous and legendary War of the Worlds radio adaptation, which many listeners thought was actually real. Welles had turned down Hollywood for many, many years until 1939 when he did sign with RKO, where he had complete and total creative control over the final cut. He initially tried to make an adaptation of Heart of Darkness, but, well, he went on to move on to make something else, but he did bring Heart of Darkness to the stage, and he hired Mank, who wrote radio scripts for Orson's Mercury production troupe, which is where Mank starts. I loved how the opening of the movie, and on the surface it's a far cry from Fincher's other work, but there are elements of the docudrama of The Social Network and the gritty storytelling of his other great back catalogue. It opens like a true Hollywood era movie and is stylized like that throughout, and the soundtrack is just mesmerizing by, of course, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. It is on Spotify, so you can go and check that out, and I will be listening to it while I do edit this video. Mank arrives at the North Verde Ranch, but has a broken leg and is told it's near impossible to get alcohol, but he does manage to get his hand on the source. He's given an assistant from London, played by Lily Collins, and her husband is in the RAF and seems resentful of the UK being the only one doing the work against Germany in World War II. The spectre of World War II looms over the entire movie, with money troubles for MGM, and Mank even had to have his name taken off some of his movies because his name was, of course, of a Jewish origin there, otherwise they would be banned in Germany. Mank chats to Orson on the phone, and I wondered where I recognised the actor who plays Orson Welles. Well, he was the guy in The Crown who was in one of the later episodes who had a sort of relationship with Princess Margaret. But we get to a few weeks earlier as his wife undresses a drunk mess of a human that is Mank, and he did have some major drinking problems, and he was involved in a car crash, which is where Orson visits him and offers him a job. Initially working for radio plays, and in reality they worked on the idea for the movie together, and they settle on William Hurst, and Mank was sent to a ranch in seclusion to finish the script. As we learnt at the end of the movie, it was just so he can actually have no distractions, and he did later die of alcohol-related issues. In present day, he is dictating the script from his bed, and his assistant is wide-eyed at the idea of Marion Davies, who many think was the inspiration for Susan Alexander Kane, the alcoholic wife of the main character of Citizen Kane. Marion Davies, who would later see in the movies played by Amanda Seyfried in one of her best roles, was the mistress of William Hurst, whose life Citizen Kane is actually based on. Marion's reputation was destroyed after the movie came out, and while in reality she was a successful movie star in the golden age, the movie portrayed her as a homewrecker with little talent, and it was very disingenuous to show her like that. Unfortunately, Mank does sort of go that line. Mank is an interesting movie as it intertwined the script writing process with flashbacks with Mank's interaction with Marion and Hearst and how he was spurned by them, creating his hatred and desire, and to portray them badly as well. Much of it wasn't true. In 1930, he was working for a studio and coming up with movie ideas. In the late 20s, he was actually the head of Paramount's scenario department, and we see amazing shots of the golden age of Hollywood with backlogs, different characters and such. And though Mank is black and white, it looks stunning. A new hire meets Mank's brother, who himself wrote and directed legendary movies like Guys and Dolls. This is very much a love letter to old Hollywood. And now, if Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was actually a love letter to that era, that 70s era of movies that Quentin Tarantino loves so much, well, this is itself a love letter over to the 30s, and funny enough, this sort of does it better. But of course, both movies are a love letter to certain times, and they reflect those times. We see his alcoholism in action as he leaves the back lot and returns and seemingly had 10 pints as he wanders around and later meets Marion Davis as she's on set and asks for a smoke. This is the start of their friendship with Mank, and presumably one of the weird platonic affairs who his wife Susan mentions near the end of the movie. He also meets William Randolph Hearst here, brought to life by Charles Dance. Hearst was a newspaper magnate, as mentioned in the movie, but he was also a congressman and drummed up support for the Spanish-American War, the war that would later damage Spain's whole influence on the world and lead it to be a declining power and lead America on the path to being a mega power. He also helped ban hemp. Yes, it would affect his paper mill businesses, and is why cannabis and marijuana is so vilified even to this day. He was a massive opponent of Roosevelt and the New Deal, which was mentioned in this movie. However, the New Deal would go on to change America for the better. Hearst formed Cosmopolitan Pictures to make movies for largely his mistress Marion, and he made his money from yellow journalism. Yes, awful stuff from basically the Fox News of the day, and got most of his money from his father, who was a gold rush tycoon in the South Dakota hills. Yes, those ones which were stolen from the Native Americans. And he later famously mismanaged his fortunes, and Marion does hint at this later in the movie. As it cuts to the present, we learn his assistant's husband was lost at sea during the war, and the Atlantic crossing in the war was beyond dangerous. He was later found on the Orkney Islands, which are north of Scotland. Mank, in between bouts of non-drunkenness and drunkenness, is urged to make the script simpler, but Orson initially wanted to make a story about an icon and show it about 7 times from different perspectives. It cuts back to 1934 as Mank tries to get his brother a job at MGM, only for Mayer, yes, one of the owners and one of the M's in MGM, and he wanted to propose wage cuts, so Mayer here is not doing too well, and we'd later learn that while he promised the workers that they would get back pay, yep, that never happened. Labour woes were a big problem during this era, an era when the movies were not doing too well in Europe because, there was a massive frickin' war. Unions such as the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild were forming to battle horrible pay and treatment from movie moguls like Hearst and Mayer. The AMPAs, yes, famous for the Oscars, were formed by Mayer to dissuade people from joining these new guilds. Throughout the movie, Mank is implored by people in Hollywood to renege on his deal to write the script, as Orson wants to go head-to-head with Hearst, and the topic of the movie was also far too contentious. He's bribed in all but name to stop working by a few people. In 1933, Mank and his wife arrive at Hearst's home, which looks just like it did in Citizen Kane, a few shots that we see, and one of his homes that we saw is still standing to this day. The topic of conversation here was centred around Nazi Germany and Upton Sinclair. Hitler's rise to power was downplayed, despite being given absolute power after the Reichstag fire in 1933, and that year was essentially the most important year, I deem, in European history, because it cemented the route to World War II, and, well, World War II changed the landscape of not only Europe, but the world. They discuss movies and talk about how great 42nd Street was, which was a legendary musical and also a book. Mank seems to side with the socialists and is warning of Hitler, and we know he had a big interest in the plight of Germans as he helped save a family and then employed them. That was a mass exodus from Germany during this time, most notably Einstein went over to America. While Mank is an outsider in Hollywood for his drunkenness and general stubbornness, well, he is also highly left-wing, and Upton Sinclair was supported by him, who was a writer and creator of the End Poverty in California movement, and then went on to try his hand at politics. Hollywood bosses hated him and slandered him, like we saw in the movie, fearful of workers wanting more money and Dust Bowl migrants arriving in California. Just think of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath, those kind of people descending upon Hollywood when it was just in its boom period, despite, of course, there was a massive, deep recession. May and Hearst are desperate to stop his election in this movie. Orson calls as he's finished Heart of Darkness, a play he adapted, and a radio production from the iconic book. Its most famous adaptation is, of course, Apocalypse Now, as it cuts to 1934 again, as Mank meets a friend down on his luck, as there is rumours of Hollywood moving to Florida. And I guess there might have been, because there's a Hollywood in Florida. His friend is down on his luck due to the Great Depression, which was a stock market crisis that started in 1929 and ran all the way throughout the 30s. Mank's brother is also trying to form a union strike, but Mank isn't so sure and does seem to be conflicted, playing nice with the studio magnates and being true to his beliefs. Now, one of the executive Irving asks Mank why he isn't donating to the anti-Sinclair fund and hints that Mayer would be furious that he isn't actually helping them. Now, Irving was the boy genius who funded and created so many profitable movies, but he had a heart disease as a child and was told he wouldn't live past 30, but sadly died in his mid-30s, and we do see his funeral in this movie. Irving works to make anti-Sinclair newsreels, which did happen, and Sinclair had no hope against fighting this slander, and, well, he just couldn't beat them, as Mank then meets one of his friends from earlier, like I mentioned, one of the people from Of Mice and Men or Grapes of Wrath, who is essentially a homeless hobo template, and is paid to wear Sinclair's signs, making Sinclair look unattractive to normal voters. Marion could get these newsreels cancelled, but she's already left for Warner Brothers and made her exit, which Mank just laughs at. She said earlier in the movie she would be happy to help people and share her wealth, but this comes into direct conflict with her own ego. We then cut to the 1934 election, and Mank's gambling problems are exposed once more as he makes a bet with Irving about the election, despite his bet being wiped by him earlier in the movie. Sinclair gets trounced, and the man who made the newsreels becomes depressed and later sadly kills himself. And Mank's hatred of Hearst and all of this starts to rise. Mank's brother is someone else who tries to stop Mank from making Citizen Kane, and he says how he's angry at being dropped by Hearst, and, well, his brother was also dropped from being involved with The Wizard of Oz, which is the talk of the town due to its budget. And funny enough, Mank actually wrote parts of Wizard of Oz, the legendary movie, and turned in a 17-page script for the Kansas section, but went on to be uncredited. Mank speaks to Marion in the present later in the movie, and they talk about the script for Citizen Kane, and while she doesn't mind it being based on her, which Mank denies, she asks him to stop it for Hearst and not to kick him when he's down, as well he's not doing very well. I'm sure Mank absolutely loved that. Orson Welles famously had 300 pages of notes, which is mentioned by him in the movie, but no one will show the movie due to pressure from MGM. Now, MGM wanted to buy the movie from RKO and shelve it, but later in the movie this didn't work, and we finally learn of the major moment that Mank had caused him to hate Hearst, as he arrives drunk to a costume party with just no costume. He arrives and makes a show of himself and talks about a Don Quixote adaptation and how it should be about a newspaper magnate insulting Hearst in a drunken tirade and is then sick. This all hints how he wants to make a movie about Hearst. Hearst takes him aside and hints that Mank is his monkey and Hearst is the organ grinder. It was the final straw, and Orson talks terms with Mank in the modern day, or at least the present, for the movie, who wants a screen credit. This was his one final middle finger to the studio system, and well, this would be his rosebud. Mank did famously get a co-writing credit, and is disputed to this day as to who wrote what. However, it is risky having Mank's name on the credits, as it would be banned in Europe due to his reputation as well. However, the movie is made. It went on to be an absolute icon. Now, they both won an Oscar, and in the press conferences they give, it's hinted that they don't really like each other that well. But, well, I loved this movie. I thought it was just superb. Now, of course, Gary Oldman here was stunning as the acerbate, the sharp and witty Mank, and he's the guy you kind of hate but you just like keeping him around, or the guy you like having at parties because he's funny even though he does get far too drunk. But overall it was a sharp movie from David Fincher here, and I really adored it. I'd love to know what you think down below in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, if you like these comparisons to history, to what is real, what is not, I might do a Queen's Gambit video as I've just finished that series. So let me know if you want that. Please drop a like down below and subscribe with notifications on, and I'll see you soon, and goodbye.